Okay, I believe that'll work.
Very good. Looks like it is recording. All right. Well, I will go ahead then, since we are recording and it is noon, go ahead and get started. People, I'm sure, will come and go as the time passes, but we already have 32 people attending. So thanks, everyone. This is a town hall, academic affairs town hall meeting. I've been talking about having these for, it seems, I think Ann is here for at least a couple of years through now two faculty senate presidents. Um, we toyed with any number of different names for what a town hall with the provost might be. Pondering with the provost was one of them. Wine with Wayne, that was a WHINE. With Wayne was another one, but I don't know what we'll settle on. But in any event, what I did want to do is just provide an opportunity really for faculty, staff to have an opportunity to engage with me about issues that are pressing and concerning to the campus community as a whole, and really to provide some opportunity for greater transparency around decisions, give you an opportunity to have input into decisions that are being made. What I do want to state is that while I want to have town halls and be transparent, this isn't in any way meant to circumvent or go around the existing leadership structures that are in place. Obviously, you have department chairs that you can talk to who should be talking to your deans who would talk to me about things. You have Hillary as our new faculty senate president this year, and faculty leadership and governance structures are there as well. And you have faculty senate representatives from each of your departments whom you are free to talk to, and hopefully you're getting information about some things that are coming down the pike. So nothing I really intend to talk about in these meetings would be new or different than what gets talked about in the Academic Affairs Council or in faculty senate meetings. And I certainly don't want to do anything that makes it look like we're short circuiting those processes. So anything that's coming out, this will be opportunity if you ask me direct questions. If you have questions or concerns, faculty senate representatives are here. We'll get those back in front of the relevant bodies if decisions need to be made. But I do think it's important that we just have opportunities for open conversation and again to address sort of the pressing challenges of the day. And this particular Abby Merrill is my presidential intern, and I think I saw her here, maybe not. Maybe she stepped out. In any event, she will be helping. I don't know if you'll get an email from her, but we're going to be setting up additional town halls, and I'm thinking to try to do one a month on kind of an ongoing and regular basis, as there are issues that need to be addressed. And so we'll be soliciting from you questions or questions about what you might like to have an opportunity to discuss in a larger faculty forum. But today's meeting was going to focus on two things that started to get some attention and traction over the summer, especially, which were the SRIs, or student ratings of instruction, and the RTP process, the retention, tenure, and promotion process. How those two things aligned, how they misaligned, as some might have concerns about, and sort of questions about how we effectively move forward with addressing some of those questions. So with that, what I'm going to do is kind of spend a few minutes here giving some feedback onto things that have come up, questions that I've heard, and give you some data points that I think will be relevant to the conversation. Susie Cox is here. She's got some questions that she's been gathering or hearing from the community as a whole. So we'll just kind of start with her with any first questions. But really, I want this to be an opportunity for conversation, back and forth discussion and dialogue. I'm not bringing you here for me just to give you a presentation and then send you on your way. I don't think that's exactly what would be most effective and efficient here. So With that being said, I'm trying to share my screen, and I think if I hit this, it goes into its presentation mode. Does everybody see that? Okay, so
Yes.
Academic Affairs Town Hall, SRIs, and the RTP process. And so if I can, oh no, it's not, hold on, I think I gotta do something else here. So, is it not advancing? Try this one more time. Still not advancing, is it? Oh, wait, maybe I do it down here. There we go. Okay, the current issues, and these are some of the things that came into academic affairs that I was hearing from various spaces around campus over the past several months, and some of the primary issues I really want to be able to address today. But one of them, and probably one of the most common concerns, was at academic affairs. And I wasn't sure if that meant academic affairs as my office or whether it's kind of high concerns at the dean's offices or where they may be. But at some point, too much emphasis was being placed on the SRIs and the RTP review, and or that academic affairs has a minimum score for the promotion and tenure decisions. So this was kind of a common question that was coming up through the summers, that we did have a minimum scoring range, which we don't, or that too much emphasis was being placed on the SRIs. Concerns that recommendations from the RTP committees, chairs, peers have taken a back seat to student comforts or enjoyments with a particular class. That is, the way the SRIs are being weighted and reviewed was kind of taking priority over the recommendations that were coming from the RTP committees themselves. Some have suggested SRIs have a bias, shouldn't be used at all in terms of faculty evaluations or RTP decisions or annual reviews and those types of things. That the administration has a record of denying applications for tenure and promotion based almost entirely on hearsay. What typically separates faculty who receive tenure from those who don't is the level of difficulty of the courses. And these were a couple of things here in a oh, I'm getting echoing now. Maybe echoing stop. I think it did. It just, if you have your mics, if you have questions or something, certainly turn your mics on. If you keep them off, it kind of helps with any feedback that we might get. And it's troubling. There were concerns that maybe these practices had become more pronounced over the past year in terms of the RTP process. So these are some of the issues and complaints that we have been hearing, and some of the issues that I really want to try to address today, either in my presentation or in questions that you might have. So I've talked to a couple of bodies over the summer. One, we were having meetings with the RTP committees themselves. As you know, many of the departments, most all the departments are really looking at revising their RTP criteria and making changes for those. This was something that's supposed to have happened in every department every 5 years, though we ended up going through about a 10-year period in which no one had updated their RTP criteria. And so we're now trying to play a very difficult game of catch up to get those criteria in place and approved, and then start the regular cycle every year. A fifth of the departments would be expected to again go through that review process. So that will get us back on track with the RTP process. So I've talked to the RTP committees, talked to the faculty senate. And one of the questions that I really wanted to get out there was that there seemed to be this concern that somehow that there are incredibly high standards. I'm hearing that some faculty are concerned that no one's getting tenure, or tenure is very difficult, or the administration really takes a drastic effort to try to deny cases of tenure to faculty. And what I found over a 15-year review is that there were 413 tenure portfolios reviewed. And in that 15-year period, there really were only 19 cases that were denied, which means that 95% of RTP cases, 95% of faculty who apply for tenure and promotion are granted tenure and promotion. So there obviously will be cases where someone might leave the institution or after the third year review make some decision not to continue and not to apply for tenure. But for all of those who get to the point of submitting their portfolio, 95% of the cases are approved. So one of the claims was that it was troubling that the practices, that is the overuse of SRIs, have become more pronounced over this past year. And I think the concern was really that somehow Academic Affairs was using SRIs to overturn decisions that were made at lower levels and using them, and they felt in a way that was inappropriate in that regard. But in fact, over this past year, the reviews look very much like they have for the past 15 years. We had 43 cases that were reviewed for promotion and tenure this year. One of those cases was deferred to an early application, but that left 32 tenure cases and 11 promotion cases that came before Academic Affairs. And of those cases, for tenure reviews, 94% of the faculty in their mandatory year who applied for tenure were awarded tenure. So again, 2 of the 31 cases, only 2 of the 31 cases that applied were denied. And as I mentioned, one of those tenure cases was deferred. So this is, again, a pretty high rate of approval. The Board of Trustees granted tenure for all but those 2 cases at a rate of 94%. Rank reviews were a little bit lower. 60% of the faculty who applied for rank advancement were recommended for rank advancement. The percentage, well, when you're looking at the actual end numbers, it was only 11 faculty applied for rank advancement, and 4 of those cases were denied. And they weren't all denied because of conflict between Academic Affairs and the RTP committees. In several of these cases, there was actually concurrence between the RTP committee and the recommendation that came from Academic Affairs that went on to the president and ultimately to the Board of Trustees. While there was concern that there might have been something weird that happened this year, in fact, what happened this year looks very similar to what's happened over the past 15 years in terms of those reviews. Another concern was that the Academic Affairs and the RTP committee reviews was that recommendations from a retention, tenure, and promotion committee had taken a back seat again to student comfort, or that we were relying on the SRI scores and overturning RTP decision recommendations. And what I've said to the groups before, and what I want to say really certainly in the public forum within the town hall, is that Academic Affairs takes very seriously the faculty recommendations that are coming out of the departments and the RTP recommendations from those departments. And in fact, in this last cycle, Academic Affairs concurred with the RTP decisions in 93% of the cases. There were, again, of the 31 cases that we considered for tenure, Academic Affairs recommendation concurred with the RTP decision in 97% of the cases. And for rank advancement, we concurred in all but 2 of the cases, 9 of the 11 cases. So this is a pretty strong alliance between faculty and what they're recommending, and ultimately the recommendation that came out of Academic Affairs toward promotion and tenure cases. And while there were varying, they were all over the place in terms, of the nature of. In some cases, the RTP committee made a recommendation that Academic Affairs agreed with, but the deans were there were varying recommendations along the way. There wasn't kind of a lockstep. Well, these were all about RTP decisions that were overturned or somehow by Academic Affairs. So, in at least one of the cases, in fact, there was a concurrence between Academic Affairs and what the RTP committee had, the decision that they had made, which was contrary to the similar decision at the dean and department chair level.
Wayne?
Yes, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
It's all
So-
good. Did you want to take questions now, or do you want to wait until you're done with your initial remarks?
Let me just get through some of these really quickly, and then we'll get right into questions, because I'd like to get the slides off and really just have a conversation.
Great.
So I'll quickly go through the rest of these. On the RTP committee appeal, so one of the other questions that came up repeatedly was that there were a lot of appeals this year, and concern that somehow this reflected the fact that academic affairs was doing something kind of weird, contrary to what the RTP committee's decisions that were made. What's important to point out is that in some of the cases, what the decision that went from academic affairs was the same decision that was made by the RTP committees, and those faculty appealed those decisions. In a couple of cases, at least, there were decisions that were contrary. The RTP committee made one recommendation, academic affairs did make a different recommendation. But in all of those 43 cases, there were 6 appeals of RTP decisions that went out from the Board of Trustees. And when those were fully vetted, 4 of the 6 cases, upon being reheard by a faculty senate reevaluation committee or the appeals committee, the appeal committee denied 1 appeal, and then 3 of the cases were reheard by another committee. But overall, those 4 cases reaffirmed the decisions that had been made by the Board of Trustees. And then there were 2 recommendations that were contrary to the decision that was made by the Board of Trustees. So this would suggest, again, there are only 2 cases where faculty did not concur with the decisions that were made by the Board of Trustees and the recommendations that came out of academic. So then the question is, well, what do we do with the SRIs? How are they used in the RTP process? How are we using them? What are we going to do with them going forward? Are we cherry picking things? Are we looking for ways? I mean, I hear a lot of concerns that for administration, we want to deny tenure. We're trying to get rid of faculty. I just want to affirm to anyone who's here or might be watching the recording is that, there's nothing that can be further from the truth. We do want to recruit and retain really good faculty. We want to support them, and we want to get them tenured. The process is incredibly expensive. And so it's not something that we just want to bring someone in and unfortunately have them denied tenure and leave the university. That's not in anyone's best interest. There has never been a conversation, certainly with me, not with the president, about, how do we get rid of faculty or what are we trying to do that? So if there is rumor to that effect, it's not true. Now, that being said, I think that there is a desire to ensure that we're holding faculty to high standards and that we're evaluating them appropriately and making important decisions, because at the end of the day, the tenure decisions, and particularly at a teaching institution, rely heavily on an evaluation of that faculty member's capacity and effectiveness as a teacher. But we are making long-term decisions about employment that are going to have impact for many, many years to come. So they are very important decisions that we take seriously. But it's certainly nothing is being done with behind the scenes. How do we get rid of, or how do we inappropriately treat faculty in this process? So these are some of the things that came up also in the conversations that were concerns about SRIs. One was that, and I heard sort of repeatedly that the reliance on SRIs results in faculty members not being as rigorous in their classes, or that faculty members who are more rigorous tend to get lower evaluations, implying that those who are less rigorous get higher evaluations. And that's a difficult thing to, even nationally, the studies, and there's some variance where the studies may come out, but there are faculty who are quite rigorous who get really good evaluations. And there are faculty who maybe are not so rigorous or not in as difficult of courses who don't get as good evaluations. And so the idea that the rigor, that somehow the SRIs impacts or negatively impacts the rigor of the courses or the instructors isn't something that's well-founded. There's some debate about this, but it's something that we certainly want to be aware of. Concerns about the over-reliance on student evaluations encourages faculty, again, to decrease the quality of their courses or the rigor of their courses. Some studies looking at looking at the literature, do suggest that there's just not strong evidence for the fact that bad teachers get better evaluations, that having high standards leads to low evaluations, that students are not competent to rate faculty members. That's something we can talk about, what exactly they should be doing in the SRI. SRIs are unreliable. There are biases in there, personal factors unrelated to learning can influence the rankings. And a lot of the stuff is we know that it's true, that there are biases, that people say all kinds of crazy things in the student evaluations. The question is how significant is that, and how can we still use the SRIs in an important way for evaluating the quality of instruction that our students are receiving. Why are they important? Well, they do allow students to give us feedback about their experience in the classroom, and I think that's probably one of the most important things. While peer evaluations and other types of assessments are important, the student, arguably, though that some may not attend every day, are in class almost all the time. And so they're the ones who are there throughout the duration of the course. They're the ones who are experiencing the course or paying for the course. And obviously it's important to know what their experience is like. SRIs certainly can flag issues, especially those that are recurring, that may negatively impact the student's educational experience. And I've been asked, actually I was asked in another meeting with another group of faculty, it's like, well, how are SRIs used, particularly at the upper administrative and the academic affairs level? And it really is sort of this. They flag things that are kind of outside the norm. I mean, everyone's going to have a bad, not hopefully, but everyone will have a bad SRI. Everyone will have a bad experience in a classroom. Everyone, classrooms, as you all know, they develop their own personalities. And sometimes things just, no matter how hard you try, just don't go well. So the fact that someone has a bad SRI score, an aberration here or there, is not really something concerning. It's when you start noticing patterns of behavior, and especially things that are outside, again, the average SRI, that you start to look at and try to figure out what's going on. And is this indicative of a concern about that particular instructor? The students are the only ones who, again, can attend, so they bring that unique perspective. And while, I'm not saying that this is the sole reason, but it is something to keep in mind. The students are paying a lot of money for these courses. They have expectations. Students want to learn. And I think in that regard, have a right to have their voices should be heard in terms of how we respond to those concerns. The last couple slides, because I do want to again get off of this, is, why is this so important? In terms of the tenure process itself, I think that one of the biggest threats to tenure is just faculty holding each other accountable. You do hear murmurings here and there occasionally of what's the future of tenure. You'll see some state legislatures, not Utah, but other states that have, I don't think any have been successful yet, but introduced legislation to abolish tenure in their state institutions. And some of that comes back to this feeling that there's not an accountability. So we just really need to step up, ensure that we are documenting and appropriately evaluating our faculty and making decisions about who to grant tenure. And unfortunately, in those cases where we might need to deny tenure. So the next steps is I've been thinking about what do we need to do. One, I think, and there are some groups already working on some of these things. Some of them are opportunities where we just need to be sure that we have coordinated efforts. But, the first thing is to have a reliable instrument for reporting student experiences in the classroom. We have to have faith that the instrument, that the questions that they're being asked are appropriate. And this sometimes comes up, and I think it's a legitimate concern faculty have, is, you've spent all these years preparing to be an instructor. How can this student who's just been in your class possibly evaluate your pedagogical methods? And there are appropriate questions to ask and questions that they can't ask. And so whether the flipped classroom is better than X, Y, or Z, I don't think is necessarily something that we might ask students, but whether or not the instructor created an environment that was conducive to learning is something that a student could give you some feedback and opinions on. The instrument must be utilized alongside other instruments. under no circumstance can the SRI or should the SRI be the sole means in which we evaluate the effectiveness of student teaching. And academic affairs doesn't do that. I don't do that, and I think it would be misleading to do so. One of the challenges, however, is that we, as an institution, don't have a very robust set of tools and instruments to evaluate faculty performance in teaching. And so we need to be sure that we have multiple instruments in place and that we're using them appropriately, and that the SRIs are there, but that they're being used appropriately as just a component of an overall strategy for evaluating effectiveness in teaching. We must have a more robust system, as I said, for doing that. One thing that's less reliable, I found, are the peer evaluations, and I just put this on here. Peer evaluations tend to be incredibly positive, and I think that, in fact, that's a good thing. I mean, we do want to be supportive of faculty, but they tend to be, and I don't know, sometimes I hear, well, people are reluctant, they don't want to put anything negative in the peer evaluation, but there's not any faculty member who doesn't have something that they could improve on in any given particular period of time. And so we need to figure out how to effectively use these as tools for mentoring faculty and helping them develop professionally, and not have them seen as just something that's punitive or negative, or a way of negatively evaluating faculty in the process. So I'm asking now, I think faculty, administration, we all really need to work together to develop the processes. And certainly I'm looking for opportunities to enhance the role of faculty in evaluating and making recommendations regarding the RTP process. I brought this up at Faculty Senate a couple of weeks ago and got kind of mixed results. There were some that seemed favorable, some that were concerning. We do have, in the process as it stands now, if there is a problematic case, there is a committee that will flag those problems and refer it to academic affairs. What I would like is, in cases where either I've identified a problem or there is a problem along the way, that we have another committee of faculty that can actually review and make recommendations to the provost as a second level or layer of engagement in the process. So that brings more voice, more input and role for the faculty in evaluating RTP cases, especially when you might have an SRI or concerns around SRIs that are impacting that particular decision. So I'm going to stop sharing those slides. That was just kind of to focus some of the conversation around some of the issues that I've been hearing and concerns that I've been hearing. And now I really want to just engage you, answer your questions. I'll pull up the chat if I can, because I suspect there are a lot of things showing up there.
There aren't a lot of questions.
Susie, what do you, let me turn it over to you. What do we got going on?
All right, so I'm going to start us off with 5 or 6 questions that I've heard as chair of the Faculty Senate RTP and Appeals Committee, and then we can open it up to everyone else. So first of all, thank you for sharing that data and those points with us. As you mentioned, there's a perception that SRIs are being weighted more heavily, and people are wanting to know how that relates to the revisions of the RTP criteria that have been going on for the last couple of years. And really specifically, is the administration trying to change or raise the bar for tenure?
Well, that's a good question. And let me get to raising the bar. You know, keep in mind that many of our departments haven't revised their RTP criteria in 10 years. And we're a much different institution than we were 10 years ago. So in terms of raising the bar, what I do think the institution wants to do, what I want to do, what I think the president wants to do, is to put us on a path where we will be one of the premier teaching institutions, not just in the state of Utah, but in the country. And so what I think the RTP evaluative process should do is departments are looking at their RTP criteria, is certainly comparing them with our operational and more importantly, our aspirational peer institutions. Where do we want to be in the next 5 to 10 years? And what type of RTP criteria, what type of faculty do we need to have in place? And what do they need to be doing effectively to allow us to get to that point? So in some cases, I think the answer is yes. The administration may be asking departments to up the bar. and to evaluate their criteria and establish more rigorous criteria for those departments. Some departments already have, and as I was looking at them, I was like, oh, that seems a little strong. So there could be situations where you have departments that need to look at their requirements and be sure that they are properly aligned with our mission as a teaching institution. So, if a department had a really heavy research agenda and criteria in their proposal that kind of set us outside the mainstream of what a teaching institution would look like, then I would say that needs to be reevaluated. It's kind of hard. We're looking department by department, and I would say that in some cases departments are right on, and in other cases I think that there's some departments that really need to be more clear. And the other challenges is in some of the criteria, and I had this in my other previous institution, there were some department criteria that were really looked more like processes than criteria. That is, they told you what you were supposed to do, but they really didn't tell you what exactly you needed to accomplish to get to, the point of promotion or the point of rank advancement. And so in some cases, that's not really raising the bar. It's just saying you've got to put down and articulate very clearly what the criteria for promotion are, not the process by which you get to that criteria. So we have people that are just kind of all over the place, and we're trying to create some consistency. And so that, at the end of the day, I don't think any of this should be surprising, and I want it to be take a lot of the mystery out of it. A faculty member is hired, they should be given the criteria, they should know what they're supposed to be doing. Third-year review comes along, they should have a pretty good idea about whether they've engaged in activities that are appropriate for their rank advancement. And that third-year review should either affirm or recalibrate their expectations about whether they are on a proper trajectory for tenure. But I don't want it to be scary for anyone. And as I said, most of the time, 95% of the time, people who apply for tenure get tenure. So it's not, I don't think that we're suffering from an overly high expectations for tenure and promotion at UVC currently.
Okay. So related to this, one of our faculty members asked if there's a way to, and then I'm interjecting, or should we articulate the exact weight of SRIs in the RTP process? I know that setting a numerical bar is generally not perceived as the right way to go with that. So how might departments kind of quantify or establish how those SRIs would be weighted in their RTP criteria?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the numerical scores often are not sensitive enough. I don't think you're going to look at somebody, here are really pretty high. 4 or 5, I think, is probably about the institutional average that we see. And I don't think you say, oh, somebody's a 4.6 is an exceptional and stellar instructor, and someone at a 4.4 is a horrific instructor that we should not tenure. The level of sensitivity there can be a challenge. And I haven't seen any, and the weighting of things can be difficult. How much weight should they play depends in part on what's being revealed by the SRI. So if you had an instructor that was, let's say this was the evaluation, that every semester, almost every class, you're getting reports that the instructor doesn't hand back any assignments or feedback to the student until the last week of class. That would be, I think, a horrific pedagogical style. And let's suppose that this has been addressed with that faculty member, and that faculty member just doesn't want to, doesn't change it. Still, you're coming up for promotion and you're still getting these exact same complaints from students after you've tried to intervene. I don't think you would say, well, the SRIs only count 30%. So, and there's these other things. I mean, it should have been part of the peer reviews. There should have been other factors you would think that would have weighed in to say, okay, this instructor, we've looked at their syllabi, we've looked at whatever we're looking at to make a determination that they're not exactly engaging in the most robust pedagogical styles or methods in their classrooms. I would think that would be a case where we might, a department and the academic affairs might make a negative recommendation for promotion or tenure. But I don't know that you could say, well, that's because the SRIs accounted for 30% of the weight in this overall calculation. So it's really difficult for me to answer the question. What I think that we do need are, again, a robust set of tools that includes evaluation of, classroom, obviously the syllabi, pedagogical methods that are being used, peer evaluation, student evaluations. And once you have this composite packet of instruments, then it's a judgment about whether the person that you're evaluating has, when you review their entire body of work, is appropriate to promote or not. And what I've said is that, when departments are looking at these decisions, we're all fiduciaries of the university. Our primary obligation is to ensure the health and well-being of the institution. And the question you have to ask is, once all of these factors have been evaluated, is continuous appointment, in the case of tenure, is continuous appointment in the best interest of the institution? If it is, then there should be a positive recommendation. If it's not, it should be a negative recommendation. But gosh, it's really difficult for me, and certainly put a numerical value on it. I can't imagine saying, there's some floor. The other thing that can happen, and sometimes departments will do, I've seen this in this process, is well, the overall average is such and such. But if you dig down into the evaluations, you may find one of the questions or one of the concerns, they're getting 2s in their evaluations around a very significant aspect of the pedagogical, of their pedagogical skills. And so then you may say that's a significant issue that we really need to address. And if they can't correct it, then perhaps may not warrant ongoing employment. But those are usually the rare cases. And I think at the end of the day, all of these instruments should be used from day one until that point as developmental. You should be giving them feedback. They should see it. We should, use teaching and learning if there's a problem. The goal is to be sure we're giving adequate support to every faculty member. I'd be perfectly happy that we tenure all of them as they come through, as long as it's all appropriate to do so.
So given that, what you just said, are you supportive of the use of statistical analyses to compare faculty using strictly their SRI scores? And if so, how should those analyses be used?
Oh, that's a good question too. And I guess this is getting to the septile question that's been floating around. I think it's helpful to know where one stands compared to one's peers in terms of the evaluations. But you're putting that in the only category of should this be a, and I think that we have to have more robust measures of teaching and instruction, and student perceptions of their experience is an important component, but it can't be the only component, and sometimes not even the most important aspect of whether or not an instructor is being effective in the classroom. Some classes are more conducive to it, because if you have an instructor that's teaching basket weaving 101, and to get into basket weaving 102, you have to master some skills. And every student that comes out of Professor A's basket weaving 101, they do really poorly in weaving 102. You should be getting some indication that there's something going on here that's a concern. And so some of the courses are, particularly where there are sequential courses, you can have that as a way of trying to ascertain whether or not students are being successful and the instructors being successful in a given course. But, I think that, again, knowing where you stand, and if someone is way out of line, I think that would be a flag for going back and looking at what's going on with that instructor. But I would not, if it's just a statistical analysis, we don't need RTP committees. We just, punch in the numbers and see where they land. And I do not support that approach at all.
Excellent. So do you and your office use SRIs differently from the president and or the Board of Trustees? We know the Board of Trustees has been a little bit more active of late in the evaluation of tenure and promotion files.
I think the Board of Trustees has a similar perspective, which is that they really want this to be a stellar institution. And so but No, I don't think so. I think that, again, we've concurred with the recommendations, certainly for tenure, almost lockstep with faculty. So whatever faculty RTP committees are doing around the tenure case and how they're evaluating their teaching seems to be very consistent with what we're doing when we review their decisions. Largely, the SRIs have just been used to identify really outliers in cases where were significant concerns that we thought needed a second look and needed a more detailed attention. But I just don't feel personally that we are treating SRIs differently than faculty are treating SRIs as they evaluate candidates for promotion and tenure.
And you include the president in that analysis?
Yeah, president and I can tell the president and I have many conversations about these, and I think we're pretty well in lockstep about how they're being used.
Okay. So moving from scores into the comments, and you mentioned this briefly earlier, one of the concerns I've heard a lot is that administration is cherry picking negative comments from the SRIs and using those as the basis for decisions, regardless of their frequency, the severity of the concern, and otherwise positive comments. So how are you deciding which comments to take seriously and factor into your decision making?
Well, again, it's cherry picking in the sense of that's not my sense of what's gone on. Where there have been, and again, there were a couple of cases where this came up this year where there was a difference of opinion. It's a very small number. We really were looking at whether there was a pattern of behavior, not whether there was, some happened over here and then everything was great and happened over here. But was there a consistent and concerning pattern of behavior that we felt needed to be given greater attention to? So that's the way we were, and I was looking at them as I reviewed RTP cases. One of the nice things about a more statistical analysis that most of the RTP portfolios that come in, their teaching evaluations are there. But one of the nice things about that is you kind of have a dashboard. You can kind of see more effectively whether there are patterns or whether you are engaged in more selectiveness and trying to identify concerns. I don't think that anyone, certainly in the provost's office, was deliberately trying to cherry pick and looking for negative things or ways to try to deny tenure, but did go through. And if there were, again, patterns or consistency that was concerning, those were the cases that got flagged.
I think that kind of harkens back to the other faculty members' concern about, how we articulate what the standard is within our criteria. So one more question. Oh, go ahead.
Just the fact that you have so many layers of review, RTP, department chair, dean, provost, the faculty senate, the president, there can be professional differences of opinion about what a particular concern might be. And I think some of those come up in any institution whenever you go through something as significant as the promotion and tenure process. So again, the fact that there might be differences of opinion, the RTP committee feels one thing, and we've had them, and the dean even, or the department chair felt a different thing, and the academic affairs came down on a different side. You're getting different professionals applying, I think, trying to apply a similar set of criteria, but that, even at the RTP committee, it's not always the case that you have unanimous decisions. Even at the department level, you can have differences of opinion about their interpretation of the criteria and their interpretation of the performance rankings. So
right.
The fact that there's difference doesn't mean there's anything nefarious that was going on. It just means you have different professional interpretations of that same portfolio.
Okay. I'm going to have Lynn go ahead and step in and ask that question for us, Lynn, and then I've got one more that I've got.
Thanks, Susie. It's just that I'm forgetting all of my questions. I don't have. I should be writing everything down. Thanks for doing this, Provost. My question deals with this, and it's essentially my sense on sitting on multiple appeals committees this summer is that there was an initial overview or review of some comments, and in fact, that what didn't happen is it appeared to me that above the RTP committee, possibly really above the chair level, that in fact the different levels of evaluation or review did not do due diligence, in that they essentially looked at an initial claim and then they didn't see if in fact they didn't dig further to see if the RTP committee had in fact agreed or disagreed. I guess what I'm trying to say here is I'm thinking about particular cases where a claim was made, but that claim was addressed, and it was addressed so much so that the RTP committee no longer considered that as an issue for the faculty member. And yet, as the case made its way through the process, that the initial comment was flagged, but it was like there was no digging beyond that initial comment to see that in fact the RTP committee and the chair had felt that the faculty had dealt with or addressed that issue in the interim since midterm or whatever. And there was plenty of evidence in the files so at the appeals, I got lots of evidence to look at, but still there was this, my question is, how deep is their evaluation of the material that's coming forward in regards to SRIs, and in particular comments? Because it seems to me that if there is an issue that appears at midterm, the RTP committees, in my experience, have come back and noted whether or not the faculty member has addressed that. And to me, it was a little disconcerting to see that maybe the front end of that, the initial comment, but not the fact that the lower levels had seen that the faculty member had addressed that, and there was evidence for that in the file. Does that make sense? So I'm asking, if you're gonna look at comments, yeah, you need to really do due diligence to say, okay, so did the RTP and the chair, what did they say about that? Has this been addressed since midterm? And my experience is that in the appeals that I'm aware of, that in fact there were comments at lower levels, and that may have saved a little bit of appeals time for everybody if all the levels above that had paid attention to that as well. Does that make sense? That's a long. It
does. It's just I think it's asking about whether due diligence was demonstrated in making recommendations that were contrary to an RTP decision, and whether or not you're feeling that, well, did they really pay attention? My sense was that, and certainly I think we tried, making a negative recommendation is something, we probably don't get into the depths at this level. When you have 43, and we're going to have more coming in as the years go on, we do a very thorough investigation or thorough analysis, I should say, of the cases, and ones that seem really, really strong. Obviously, you don't dig quite as deep, is one where there might be concerns that have come up. And I say this only to say that I feel that due diligence was shown in the cases that I was familiar with, particularly where there was a negative recommendation, and in particular where there's a negative recommendation about tenure because it's so significant. Now, at the end of the day, there was an appeal process, and there was a recommendation by the reevaluation committee that was the recommendation was contrary to the recommendation or the decision made by the Board of Trustees. So I think there actually was a process in place that allowed for a particular decision to be reevaluated more deeply, and then a final recommendation was made. And this is, Lynn, if you remember, I brought this up in Senate as well, and this is kind of what I was trying to get at, is that we do have a process in place for Faculty Senate where they review the portfolios and make, recommend, or they say these are problematic or unproblematic cases. This would be an example of where if we had at academic affairs level a concern, and we were concerned that maybe the RTP committee hadn't as thoroughly vetted a particular issue as well as we might have wanted, we could ask this faculty body to give it a review and give us a recommendation, without having to go through the post. Well, you could still have the post if there's still a negative recommendation. They'd still have the option of having the re-review, but it would give a deeper set of lenses on that particular case, which could then be incorporated into the decision. And I think that that gives faculty more input, a greater role in helping the provost office, academic affairs, make a recommendation when there is this difference of opinion about the significance of a particular issue and how well that issue had been addressed by the various individuals who had reviewed it. That being said, I just can only convey that academic affairs takes these issues incredibly seriously and does as thorough a job as we can. And I think that there are ways of enhancing and improving the process. And I'm happy to work with faculty senate to figure out exactly how this process can most effectively work so that we do want to ensure that faculty are being treated fairly. That being said, I will point out again that of the 6 appeals, faculty committees affirmed 4 of those decisions. So 2 of them, they made recommendations contrary to the decision. So even though there were a lot of appeals, the vast majority of the appeals were, the vast majority of the decisions were reaffirmed upon reevaluation by the faculty. So I don't think that there's, I don't think that there was an overabundance of poor decisions made in that regard.
All right, we're starting to get some questions in the chat, but I have one more long one for you. So you have spoken a lot recently, both here and at other opportunities, about RTP as a developmental process for faculty, with SRIs playing a role in that as faculty members identify areas in which they might improve, set goals, and document progress. Right now, it's not feeling that way to faculty. As you've noted, the current perception is that SRIs are being used more punitively. And faculty members are starting to express similar concerns with peer assessments of teaching. And you mentioned that those are not particularly effective, and there are some questions around how to make them more so. But faculty are concerned that if they say anything negative in a peer assessment, they could cost a good colleague their job. So as we're moving forward to this culture of trying to emphasize the positive, or right now we're kind of emphasizing the positive, right? To now we're trying to move toward addressing and growing from the negative. Isn't it possible that some faculty will be penalized as they start to get more developmental feedback, but haven't had time to make changes to their practice before they have to go up for tenure or rank advancement? So in other words, all of a sudden they're being told what's wrong.
Yeah.
And now they're up for tenure and they don't have time to change.
Time to make the changes, which is why I think that it should be developmental. And I think that we should have processes in place, as I mentioned earlier, that when faculty are hired, they are given the RTP criteria, they know what they should be doing, they're assigned a mentor certainly for teaching, either the same or different mentor and scholarship, however that department feels that works best. And then each annual review, there should be given, especially early on, opportunities for feedback given to that faculty member in the early part of their probationary period at UVU, so that they do have the opportunity to make changes as they need to. And it's difficult. There's a developmental phase, and then there are decisions that have to be made. And I don't know that you don't want to think of any decision as being punitive. It's not someone's being punished. The question is whether or not someone has achieved the milestones, has achieved a portfolio that demonstrates proficiency such that that person should be awarded and granted continuous appointment or rank promotion, is the case of going from associate to full professors. And that decision, you can have a lot more time in, obviously, and that's the difficulty with tenure. You've got basically 5 years to develop an appropriate portfolio for evaluation. So the more seriously that we can take those, particularly student comments, getting concerns that might happen in the classroom back to the faculty member in the first year or two, well before their 3rd year review, would be helpful. Now, the only time, could there be something that happens after the 3rd year review? That's where you get a bit of a crunch time. You get some evaluations at the end of year 4. You don't really have a whole lot of time to now make corrective measures, but I guess it would depend on the severity and what it is and how effectively that can be addressed. But again, my approach, I know the president's approach, we all want to do everything that we can to be supportive of faculty and supportive of them in this process. And so creating as much transparency about it, which is what I want to be able to do, given as much guidance and support, which I think is the thing that the university, I don't want to say, owes it to the faculty member, but certainly owes it to the institution. I mean, we need to have these things in place for faculty to be successful, because that's going to be in the best interest of the university and the best interest of our students.
So you're seeing kind of the peer evaluations and the SRIs, all of these assessments that we're getting, our supervisor assessments, those are formative measures, correct? To help us improve year to year.
They should be formative, but at the end of the day, at the third-year review and certainly at the 10-year review, that same information is going to have to be used to make an assessment. And that assessment is whether or not continuous appointment is appropriate for this particular individual, and whether their body of work supports that investment, that long-term investment in that faculty member. But all along that process, it should be one in which we're trying to give people feedback that will help them improve, so that they can promote, so that they can get tenure, so that they can advance in rank and make meaningful contributions to the university. And post-tenure, there is this attitude sometimes people adopt, oh, I've got tenure now, I can do whatever I want. And that's certainly not true. I mean, I think, in fact, once you're post-tenure, you have even greater responsibilities. Post-professor, you have greater responsibilities, because a lot's now been invested in you. Your obligation to give back and support the university, I think, increases at those particular points. So.
Great. All right, so we've got some questions coming in from our audience at this point. One of them is surrounding response rates. So obviously, if we have low response rates on SRIs, that can really skew the results. And UVU does not require the completion of SRIs. Is there some thought around how, we send out a thing to department chairs this week or last week, kind of with some strategies for increasing participation. Does the university intend to move toward requiring those to ensure that we get acceptable response rates?
Yeah, the requirement that's a challenge. How do you require it? One is you can refuse to release grades until a student completes their SRI scores. Other institutions around the country have, you get a pop-up thing and it makes you go fill out your SRIs before you can get access to online services and things. We toyed with this when we went from paper to electronic. Our rates dropped from 65, 70, I think they were in the 70%, dropped down to 30, 40%, which is not uncommon when you first go digital. One of the things that really positively affected it was just faculty members still holding a block of a class to do evaluations. So instead of handing out paper, you say, okay, 20 for the next 10, 15 minutes, whatever you devote to it, take out your phones, log on to the system. And with this new app that's now available, I'm thinking that we can probably coordinate it such that students can, with this UVU app, can probably do their teaching evaluation, SRIs, on their phone through that app. And you just give them the time in class and say, okay, do your SRIs. I think that if we do that, we would see a significant increase in the rate of which students respond to the SRIs. So that would be my first strategy for trying to figure out, one, getting the technology in their hands, which they all pretty much have, and then just devoting that time in your class to letting students do the SRIs. And we probably need to come up with rules around it. Typically it's, the instructor was supposed to step out of the classroom. I think a lot of that was so that you wouldn't see the evaluations coming in and know who was giving you a good or bad evaluation. It's probably not as much of a problem if they're at their desk and you're kind of standing in the front of the room, but I probably think it would be still a good idea that the instructor steps out of the classroom for a period of time and lets them do their thing, and then you come back in and go on with class. So that Vessel, I think that Vessel had asked that question. I can't remember. There was a long question about that in there. But
there's Anton. And another question that surrounds that is there a response rate at which we kind of discount the results, right? So if I've got a class of 30 students and 2 completed it, and
Yeah.
one of them said I was the worst teacher of all time, is there a point at which we can say, yeah, but it was 1 student?
I would think that that would be indicative of, yeah, once you get to that response rate, it would be pretty selective. I don't think that it would carry a whole lot of weight.
So is that a matter of reflection in the portfolio or in the annual review to kind of explain where that might have come from? And
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's something that can be addressed. And one of the things we try to get to RTP committees and even, faculty as you're preparing your folder is, don't hesitate to identify a concern that might come up, because the problem is it gets to a different level and someone has a concern and they look back. When I review these portfolios, when I was a dean, certainly now as a provost, when I'm looking at them, after I familiarize myself with the portfolio, if I see a problem, the first thing I do is go back, well, what did the RTP committee say about this? I think that's getting to Lynn's question. And that's exactly what I do. It's like, well, did the RTP committee address this? Did they find it be problematic or not? Did they adequately address the problem? So kind of sweeping things under the rug is not a really good strategy there. Because at some point somebody may have a question, and it's good that that question's been addressed in an appropriate way. And so there have been cases, and I'd see, RTP committee say, well, this person had some low evaluations, but only 2 of the 50 people in class even responded. So we don't really consider that to be a representative sample of that individual's work. Oftentimes you'll see numbers that are not that low. There's kind of somewhere in the middle. And then it becomes a little more concerning as to what do you do with it. But you could, there could be, if a sizable number of students are complaining about the same type of thing, even if it's not the whole class, if it's even a third of the class, that's still something that could be concerning. If, 30 of or 20 of 50 people, it's all filled out the evaluation, but they all say the same thing, then it's not insignificant. It's not fully representative, but it's also not insignificant. So everyone's going to have to figure out how to deal with those. And I wish there were a formula. It sounds like, but there's not. I mean, these are professional evaluations of a portfolio, and I think we do need to have standards in place and rules for governing how that's going to go. But it's more of an art than it is, I guess, a science per se. We're not just plugging in numbers and putting the portfolio through. We're asking professionals to make a professional evaluation and determination on these portfolios.
Really great segue into another question from the audience, which is, what is your position on the development of machine learning and artificial intelligence to evaluate the qualitative feedback on SRIs?
I know that there's some movement in this regard. I think that there's some research protocols going on. I don't honestly have an opinion on it right now because I haven't seen enough data or research. I think it's something to look at. I've always found the evaluative feedback, the written comments, perhaps to be the most useful in student evaluations. The numbers, you don't know why anybody is, sometimes they just sit there and give you all 5s, or they just kind of, make designs or something. You never know exactly what the student's doing. But the written comments can often be some of the most effective. And if there were a way of, that's a lot. We have thousands of students, thousands of comments. If there were a way in which that could be done effectively, that doesn't itself introduce bias or how is the machine learning really evaluating to make a determination if this is a positive versus a negative comment. But I understand that there are ways of doing it. I'd be curious to see what the research looks like and get faculty engaged in it. My opinion on it is, I guess, important. It's important what faculty's opinion is about this and what the faculty senate's been able to review. I'm not gonna be in a position of saying, oh, this is what we're going to do, regardless of what the faculty have had an opportunity to think about. So I think it's another area in which we should reflect on and look at the data and look and see what it's doing and see if it helps us more effectively evaluate candidate's teaching abilities or not. And if it doesn't, then we don't use it. If it does, and there's consensus, then I think we should look into it. So I'm open right now. I really am not leaning one way or the other. I'm really wanting to see how this research might move forward and whether it gives us something useful or not.
Great. So as you know, the Advancement of Teaching Committee has created a new peer evaluation metric. What are your thoughts about that? Is that moving us in the direction you're wanting us to move in for giving more candid feedback? Is that something you'll take more seriously as far as peer feedback is concerned?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I think that it will create an opportunity. It kind of goes back to that other question of faculty peer evaluators fearing giving any feedback to faculty because they're fearful that that's somehow going to be negatively impacted in their performance, overall performance review. And yeah, I think we need to have a way of ensuring that faculty are getting the feedback they need to be successful, and that's being documented and being used in a very formative, developmental sort of way.
And who should be giving these evaluations? There's been some confusion across campus about what a peer assessment of teaching is. Are we supposed to be getting them from only tenured faculty members, only faculty members in our department? What do you think this should be looking like?
Yeah, wow, Susie, that's a really good question. I suspect that this differs quite widely from unit to unit and department to department. I don't know if I really don't have a strong answer to that question. It would seem that it would be very helpful. Obviously, you probably want to have tenured faculty making these evaluations or sitting in on the classrooms because it avoids the potential political types of concerns. I think it could be very useful to have somebody outside your department from a related discipline sit in on a class and give feedback. Because, what you're doing might make sense to you, but not make any sense to someone outside your discipline. And then you're trying to think, well, how is my student experiencing this if someone well-educated but outside my discipline doesn't quite get what's going on in the class? So I think that it could be incredibly helpful and beneficial to get that type of feedback, and that there should be no, then the department might decide, well, yeah, we're going to have some of these auxiliary peer reviews, but we're not going to include them as part of the formal process that would give you an opportunity to kind of go out on a limb and get somebody to give you feedback where you're not as worried about it becoming part of your formal portfolio.
That's an interesting opportunity for junior faculty to complete those observations as well, because that takes a little bit of the political pressure off. But sometimes our new faculty members have some really great pedagogical insights because they haven't been teaching the same class for 15 years like I have. So
I think they should be sitting in maybe on the senior faculty classes and giving us. We'll see how politically charged that would be.
Exactly. All right, I'm more than happy to have people take the mic and ask some questions, but we do have an ongoing thread, which I'm sure you're not surprised about deans kind of coming up with their own criteria for evaluating faculty that go beyond what might be listed in the RTP criteria.
We're all bound by the departmental criteria, which is why it's so important. We've been trying to get all this approved, because the department RTP criteria is the foundation for the evaluation of a faculty member's performance. And so that's why it has to be approved through a process up to the provost's office. So once that's been approved, then that is the official document. Now there's the RTP criteria at the department level. There are university policies and guidelines. We've only had a few places where it seemed that there was some inversion, that the university guidelines, which are really pretty generic and broad, were more stringent than the department guidelines. And you got to get that resolved, because you can't have department guidelines that are less rigorous than the university set of policies. But they're pretty broad, so it's kind of hard to do that. But that being said, the departments and the dean's offices will have had an opportunity to weigh in on the RTP criteria, And once everything's approved, that should be the criteria that is being used to evaluate the candidate's performance and their movement. So it would be odd, and just to kind of bring in something completely out of, okay, I'm evaluating you by this. The candidate should have, the day they walk into the university, the criteria that's going to be used to evaluate them.
Right. At every level.
At every level, they should know what the expectations are. And I'm not supportive of anything that feels like somebody's being misled or not being given the right information, and then all of a sudden, they walk in and they're shocked. I didn't know I was supposed to do X.
Yeah.
They should know day one they're supposed to do X, and then they're evaluated at all levels on their ability to do X. We just can't be surprising people. That's not right.
All right, folks. Any other questions about SRIs and the RTP today? Anything that I've missed in the chat?
How many people do we have here with us today? Let's see what we got, 55 or so.
Yep.
Very good. Yeah, I just want to, if people are having concerns or questions or about the RTP process or about how we're using the SRIs, you can vocalize them here or vocalize them for a friend if you want to get an answer. But I do get concerned when I hear stories, true or not, that there's a lot of angst amongst the junior faculty, probationary faculty, assistant professors, how we want to refer to them in a way that doesn't seem demeaning. But these faculty members in the probationary period, I think that we should be doing everything that we can as an institution to be supportive of you. So hopefully you're not feeling that angst. I give you those numbers. 95% of the people that apply get tenure. That's a pretty high number. So that should give some comfort to people that, knowing that a really high percentage of people at the end of the day do get tenure. And if there are questions or challenges, I'm absolutely wanting to help address those. Lynn has her hand up, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I do. Thank you. Just really quick, Laura Busby put in the chat the question about the banner and the canvas. And
Right.
I know this has come up before, and I'm just wondering, is there a way that we can address that? So, I mean, as students are become very savvy with Canvas, my understanding, and I've heard some faculty say they can see their final grade before they do their SRIs. Is that true? And if so, shouldn't that be addressed if we're looking for fairness, as far as faculty and both student input?
Laura, do you want to address that? She's still here.
Sure, Wayne. I think right now it's been difficult for us to actually have that kind of a connection. We have a specific integration with Canvas, and we could, of course, look at that. But I think it's going to be kind of a bundle of requests that are made, perhaps about improving our system. We heard a request that we've jotted down about making the SRIs available in the student app. There's a lot of work that we're doing in digital transformation to bring some of our systems to a point where we can have that kind of connectivity that makes it easy to do that. Right now, it's not as easy to go back into Canvas and do those kinds of things, but we are noting it. And I know Christina's listening in as well, but I think what we would like to see is the result of maybe some of the things that are happening on the instrument, some questions, surveys and assessments that are happening with Faculty Senate. Allow all of you to make some good decisions about what is best for you. And then we need to look at the systems that will best fulfill that. So.
Great, thanks, Laura. I also want to encourage everyone, in the document that was sent out to chairs this week, what was also included there, in addition to strategies for increasing your participation, which again, if we're giving time in class, for example, for things to be completed, that's going to help a lot. The other piece of it was some language about what SRIs are, what they're for, and how we use them. I think many of us have experienced getting comments that were, about our appearance, or were talking about us as if we weren't the ones reading the SRIs. There are all kinds of strange ways that students have completed these in the past. So there's some language there too, directly to students about what they are and how we use them.
Yeah. Yeah, and those types of things regularly come up, and biases that slip in and have been noted. The literature seems to suggest that while there may be some bias, it's not that someone, the average is 4, and this bias is going to result in someone getting 2s or really low scores or really bad comments. It does. There may be some students, and I've seen and all kinds of crazy things. That being said, I don't think that those potential biases mean that it makes the tool less than perfect, but it doesn't make it worthless. I think that there are ways in which there can still be very useful information that comes from them, both again in terms of helping to improve teaching, which is one of the things that SRIs can be done, and in terms of helping us make assessments when it gets to promotion and tenure decisions.
Yeah, that was a concern that was noted earlier, that some references that you had made earlier in the year regarding these issues of bias, some literature that you had referenced is not present in today's slides. But you are saying you're aware of these biases and the impact that they might have, particularly on the comments that a faculty member receives.
Yeah, I think maybe I accidentally deleted it. No, the biases are known. They've been documented in multiple studies of SRIs. The question is how much of an impact they have. Right. While it's there, you're typically not going to see, as a result of that bias, someone saying faculty member never returned any assignments until the last day of class or whatever. I mean, those biases are not going to lead to those types of what could be really concerning reports about a particular individual faculty member's classroom performance. So, but it might, be a reason why somebody's getting a 4.4 and somebody's getting a 4.6 or something. I don't know. And there are all kinds of race, gender, age, what I call, even those crazy things. What was it? Rate My Professors. Where you could even pick whether they had a hot chili pepper or something. I was like, wow, that's really just not exactly what we want students thinking about the hotness of my faculty member. But so we obviously don't use those in our professional evaluations, but it does show or suggest that there's something that we need to be cognizant of, is that as we're using these for assessing faculty members, that things can slip in there that are inappropriate for evaluating a faculty member's performance.
All right, Lynn had her hand up, but I'm not seeing it now, so.
Oh, Susie, just really quick, when is the next time that we are slated as a university to reevaluate the SRIs?
The questions that are being asked?
Yes.
I don't know that it's been put on a regular rotation. I know that the Advancement of Teaching Committee has taken up some level of responsibility over that, but I'm not sure that it's on a regular rotation. Wayne, do you know?
I don't. I knew that they were starting to do that, and then it kind of went into some vacuous place. I'm not sure where it is right now, but I think it's something that we need to do. And there are lots of instruments that can be used, and there's some proprietary software that can be used for evaluations and all kinds of things. But I think that we should look at them, and I Susie, you or I, we should follow up and kind of see where that is, because I think it's certainly time. And I wouldn't say we have absolutely the best instrument in place for evaluating teaching, the way some of the questions are evaluated.
And I see Joy Cole, who's the chair of that committee, is on this call at the moment. Joy, do you have any update on when the committee is going to be looking at those questions again?
We actually have been waiting on some feedback from some special task forces who are going to look at biases and things. Our big focus this semester has been on the peer observation form and gathering that data. We can probably take on an SRI review next semester without any problems.
Great. Yeah, and Kat's saying that there's not currently in policy at least any kind of required cycle, so that may be something that we look at.
And somebody, Mark here, asked about when SRIs begin and end, and I think that typically you want your SRIs to be completed certainly before grades are distributed. Usually that last week, second to last week of class. And again, if we're encouraging everyone to complete their SRIs in class, you could even turn them off when classes officially end. We'd have to talk about what that might look like. But
Yeah, I really appreciated Lara's comment earlier that this is something that Faculty Senate may need to take up and really talk about again. As Violetta pointed out, we had at one point kind of gone through and made some decisions about it, but it's probably time to revisit.
absolutely.
Hillary says they're
Hillary
ready.
says ready to go with it. Awesome.
All right, any other comments or questions today about SRIs and RTP?
Anything at all? Any question from a friend that is really a concern? Well, the only thing I would say in ending is that, I feel I have a very good relationship with Hillary and the President of Faculty Senate. And no, Hillary does not agree. This is where we have a difference of professional opinion about evaluation of No, I think we have a good working relationship, and all of these decisions are in shared governance. So this isn't me coming up with some criteria that we're going to apply. We're going to be working together to enhance and improve the overall ability to evaluate performance of teaching. I think it just has to be done. So that question early on, are we raising the bar? I think, yeah. But I don't think in a bad way. We're setting the bar, whether it's raised or lowered. We're going to set expectations for where we need to be as an institution, and then faculty are going to need to perform in order to help us achieve that mission. So that's the way I think that we should be looking at this. And I will continue to work with faculty and work with faculty leadership to come up with a plan that's most effective for doing that. So if there are no other questions, Lynn says thank you. And maybe that's where we can, I always leave on a thank you. Oh, and Maddie says thank you as well. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you for coming. Thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to do this. And we will solicit other questions and topics that you might have, and we'll have another town hall here soon.
And just a reminder that everybody can submit questions at any time at Ask Academics
Yes.
at uvu.edu. So those will go directly to whoever in academic affairs needs to answer them.
Very good. Well, hopefully you had we're in that holiday season grind. So 3 weeks till Thanksgiving. Can you believe it? There we go. Well, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Wayne. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.